Hey guys, funerals and memorials in Japan do vary a little bit in how people choose to do them, but usually they are Buddhist, a Buddhist ceremony or ceremonies, and usually quite a long, complicated thing. I already made a video about that some time ago, so if you're interested in that, it'll be on the how-to playlist, because it explains a lot of the ceremony that if you go to a funeral, what you have to do, you know, taking money in envelopes and all the other things you have to do. This video is a little bit more specific. This is specifically talking about what they have, which we'd probably call in English a wake, which usually when a person passes away here, they will usually have like an open coffin type thing that they'll sometimes have in the house, or sometimes at a funeral center, at a funeral center. So during that time, people can come and visit and say goodbye, right? And usually it's an all-day thing. So I'll tell you why I'm telling you about this now is because I went to one yesterday, and it was actually a guy, and a very old friend of mine from Australia, same age as me, and he actually took his own life. So as you can imagine, it was a pretty emotional day, but it was really striking for a few reasons I'll get to. I want to try and explain it because I think it's really interesting, because it's at first the Japanese way of doing it can be quite confronting to people that come from some different cultures. So sorry, I'm sort of a bit vague on this, aren't I, guys? I'm just trying. It's a difficult subject to address, and particularly today. It's probably a bit early, but I wanted to address it while it was happening, sort of thing, because yesterday it was so striking. There's a few things that were really striking. So what they usually do is they usually put the person out in an open coffin, usually in the house or in a funeral center, and usually it's like all day, and depending on how sort of important or famous the person is, how long that goes on for. So just for a normal person, it might just be one day, so that they're laid out for, you know, from 8 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night or something, to give friends and family a chance to come and see them and say goodbye to them, and also to show respect to their family and to be with the other mourners, you know. And so for just a normal person, that just might be one day, or for someone who's sort of more important or famous that will have more people coming, they might do it for a couple of days to give everybody a chance to come, and then they'll have a funeral, and usually the funeral itself is not terribly long. It might only be an hour. So in our case, our friend, his funeral's today, and it's going to go for about an hour, and then they'll go to the crematorium, because in Japan everybody is cremated. They brought it into law some time ago that you don't have an option here anymore. It's everybody's cremated. So, but what I want to talk about was, obviously yesterday was really hard because, you know, very old friend for 40 years actually, and he's Australian, but he lives here in Japan, and about 45 minutes from where I live, so we're really close. Probably I've mentioned him, I know I've mentioned him not by name, but I've mentioned things that he's said and done in previous videos, and, you know, he's been a big part of my life for 40 years, and so obviously, you know, the fact that he'd gone at his own hand, makes it worse. You know, anybody who's experienced that, you know, it's hard when you lose anybody, but when you lose anybody who's chosen to go, it just brings lots of complicated feelings for everybody, you know. All complicated feelings. If only I'd done this, or maybe if I'd spent more time with him, or maybe if I listened to what he said, or maybe if I don't know. You go through. It's inevitable, you know. And the people there yesterday, I was hearing a bit of that sort of stuff. stuff from them too. You know, it's sort of inevitable. It's a terribly complicated thing when someone takes their own life like that, you know. I'll just say this once, maybe. It strikes me that people have a choice to take their own life if they want to, but it strikes me as an extremely selfish thing. This is the second of these wakes and funerals that I've been to that was by someone who took their own life. The other one was an uncle who'd got to 65 years old, and he retired, and he was a bit lost, and he took his own life because he was lost. You know, a Japanese guy who suddenly doesn't have a job anymore because he'd retired, was sort of lost. He didn't have any hobbies, and he took his own life. And you know, it struck me both times how devastated everybody was, not just by losing the person, but by the person who chose to go themselves. And it just strikes me that people have a choice to do that if they want to, but it's an extremely selfish thing to do. You know, whatever problem that they're having, you know, it solves that for them because they're gone, but what it does is it leaves behind a whole heap of problems for all the other people that they've left behind. You know, the people that are closest to them have got massive problems as a result, and everybody around them is affected, and there's a ripple effect where lots of people are going to be affected by that forever. I'm not going to think of my old friend or see pictures of him or be reminded of him at all forever now without thinking about the fact that he took his own life. You're not going to be able to separate from it. And I know my wife's the same with her uncle. You know, her uncle's the guy that took his own life, and she's the same with him and his family. She can't think about him or the family without thinking about that. You know, so that person in that moment's taken away their problem, but they've left a whole bunch of problems for other people. Anyway, that wasn't supposed to be the video. But that, you know, it's true. Anybody who's watching this who's thought about doing it, just be aware of what it's going to do to the people you leave behind. It's a terribly selfish thing to do. It really is. And it was interesting yesterday when talking to people that now and again people are being very careful what they said, but there were a couple of times where people said things that were sort of along those lines about it being a selfish thing, or about how much harm it's done to the people around him, how devastated these people were, you know. So you know, keep in mind, if you do that, if you do take your own life, you've got a right to do it, but you're going to leave behind a whole heap of devastated people who are going to think that you're selfish and that you've done them a lot of harm, you know, because that's inevitably how you feel. And that was the vibe yesterday. But again, that's not supposed to be the video. I shouldn't have made this video today, should I? The video is supposed to be about when I was driving there yesterday. I didn't want to go. I had so many feelings, emotions going through me. I didn't want to go. I knew it would be open casket. I didn't want to see him. I just had so much emotion going on. I just couldn't deal with it, you know, and didn't want to go. And I was driving there really slowly and just didn't want to be going there, and knew I had to sit there for a few hours, and just didn't want to be there. And he had two sons that are only in their early 20s, and a girlfriend and ex-wife and all sorts of people in his life that really cared about him, and I knew that it'll be there, and I knew that it'll be devastated. And so I really, really, really didn't want to go, right? But, and this is the point of the video, when I went in there, the atmosphere was really, really good, right? And those of us who've come from cultures where we don't normally have open caskets, it can be pretty full on when you first are confronted with it. You know, I've been to, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 of these things over the years for my old martial arts teachers and for family members, in-laws, you know, grandparents on the in-laws side, and aunts and uncles on the in-laws side, and all sorts of people over the years, you know. And it's still a little bit confronting when you've grown up in a culture where you don't normally see dead people, and you don't normally talk to dead people, because what they usually do is you go into a room, and yesterday's affair was not as big. I've been to some really big ones before. I had a martial arts master who had a really big affair, and it was a big room with lots of chairs and lots of people, and it's very formal, you know. That other video we talked about, everybody wears a black suit. Everybody, male and female, everyone wears a black suit, and it's very formal and very, as you can imagine, it's very sort of solemn. But what inevitably happens is you're there all day, and they have a room. Sometimes they'll have a separate room where you can go and eat and drink. Yesterday, it was one room that wasn't really big, and it had a table and lots of chairs, and my friend was at the end of the room, and open casket, and they'd actually laid out his favourite clothes on the top of the casket, and clothes that he likes to wear, and so you walk in and you go over, and there's a Buddhist stuff that you do with, I talked about that in the other video, burning incense, and and so you do that sort of stuff, and then there he is, and they often talk to the person who's lying there, and then you sit down at the table, and they've got food and drink, and you sit at the table and you drink and you eat and you talk, and it, at first, the way they do it, it seems a bit, it can feel a bit too much, for those of us who used to come from a place where there's a closed coffin and there's a minister and people sing songs, if you're a Christian, and hymns, and then the person's buried in the ground, and that's the end of it, and if you've come from that, the Japanese thing can seem a bit much at first, but it's really therapeutic. For a few reasons, probably. I mean, one is that Japanese people never like to show negative emotion, which includes crying and being sad, right? Now, of course, at these things, there's always somebody crying, and there's always someone with tears in their eyes, and there's always that. But they try hard to be not as much stoic as possible, as positive, and they tell funny stories, and even his sons were telling funny stories about how one of them had been trying on his jackets recently and said he wanted one of his jackets, and my friend wouldn't let the young fella have his jacket, and this guy said yesterday, well, now I'm going to get the jacket, right? And they were sort of laughing at that, and they were laughing about it, and I think it's partly the fact that because for sure everybody was crying when they were having quiet time at home, but in this group they were just being positive and talking about positive things about him, and that's that normal Japanese thing of not saying anything that's going to make other people feel bad, so they're keeping it all very positive. And the other one is that there is this thing, Japanese people have sort of usually a Shinto Buddhist style thinking about life and death, and their thing about life and death, and I mentioned this really briefly in that video recently, reviewing Shogun, that they said in that movie that you live then you die, right? And Japanese people do tend to have that thinking about life and death, is that you live and then you die, and it's that Buddhist way of thinking, and so from that point of view too, they're sort of more accepting when people pass away, they're more accepting of it, and the end result was a really, really therapeutic atmosphere. It really was really therapeutic. I mean, I felt like I didn't sleep the night before because I got the phone call to tell me what had happened the night before, and so I didn't sleep at all night, just couldn't sleep, and then went to this thing in the morning, and I was just devastated. I was a mess, trying to get my head around it, and then spent the day with these guys, and it was really positive and really therapeutic. And you could see everybody. I mean, there were people walking in. His girlfriend walked in, and she was just devastated. And I was giving her hugs and talking to her, and we're sitting down and talking. And throughout the day, she improved, and you could see that she was feeling better and better, because it was just this positive atmosphere. Everybody talking positively about my friend, and just a positive sort of thing, I know there's some Christian cultures too that have wakes where they drink, and they, my Irish friends do that. In Ireland they do that, sometimes, and it's a really positive thing. And then the Japanese thing, the Buddhist thing is that we had the all-day thing yesterday, and then today we're going to have the 1-hour funeral, and then go to the crematorium, and then after the cremation they come out with a box, and the box has pieces of bone in it, and you can take pieces of bone out of this box with the chopsticks actually, and put them in your own little box and take them home. And because most people have either a shrine or a butsudan Buddhist shrine in their house. And so the Buddhist shrines have little drawers in them, and you can take those bones home and put them in your shrine or your Butsudan, right? And so there's a part of your friend there that you've taken home, or your brother, or whoever it happens to be, and put it in your shrine at home. So they'll do that. And then what happens is, it depends on how much they do, but quite often what they'll do is then 1 week later, they'll have a ceremony at home in front of their Butsudan, the family home, in front of their Butsudan, and the Buddhist priest will come and do a thing. And then 1 week later he'll do it. And then 1 week later he'll do it. And then 1 month later he'll do it. And then 1 month later he'll do it. And 1 month later. And then 1 year later. And 1 year later. And so it sort of slowly stretches out, you know. And then quite often they'll do it every year on that date, every year, forever. And we've got ones that we go to for the grandparents, my wife's grandparents, and once a year we get invited to go to her parents' house, and the priest comes and we all sit on cushions on our knees, you know, in Seiza in front of the Butsudan, and do these mantras, basically Buddhist mantras, you know, Namaku Samanda, and they have a picture up on the Butsudan. Usually up on the wall they have the pictures of the family members who passed away in the past, so there might be 4 or 5 pictures up there. And then when you have those ceremonies, on that day, the picture of that person whose ceremony the ceremony is for, their picture will be up in front of you, next to the Butsudan, right, next to the shrine. And so it's really therapeutic. And I've watched my father-in-law when we do this ceremony for his mother, and I've watched him on that day where he's sitting there on the cushion on his knees, you know, doing these mantras and looking at the picture of his mother, and it's a really slow goodbye, you know. It's a really slow goodbye. I mean, I've been to funerals in Australia, and you know, usually it's an hour or so of singing hymns and stuff, a Christian one. It's an hour or so of singing hymns and things, and then you go to the grave place and the what do you call it, the cemetery, and then they bury the person that's finished, you know. And that's usually it, isn't it? You know, you might go somewhere after that and have some drinks and food and a bit of a laugh and things, and talk about the person, and then that's it. Whereas the way this Buddhist style of doing it, it goes on and on and on. Which again, at first it does seem a bit much, but when you watch the result and feel the result of how it's done, it makes it a really slow goodbye. So we had all day there yesterday with my friend there, lying there, you know, and so, you know, we'd talk and drink and eat and look at him for a while and talk about him, and you know, and it's sort of an all-day thing. And then today the funeral, and then, you know, 1 week later there'll be another ceremony, and 1 week later, and 1 week later, and it's a really long, slow goodbye, which gives you time to process it. Instead of the guy, I remember going to a funeral for a family member in Australia, and you walk into the church, there's a closed box in front of the church, and you walk in, there's the closed box, and then sing some hymns and do some talking, and then, you know, off you go, and the person's in the box, and off you go. And I mean, some people might be more comfortable with that, but it just seems like, and yesterday it really struck me, the difference, the effect it had, just the effect it had, from the feeling in the morning of dread, you know, dread with having to deal with this thing, to the therapeutic feeling of you know, this is good, this is healthy. The way we were dealing with it was really healthy, you know, and you could see people coming in that were really devastated and shaken up, and then as the time went on, you could see that they were feeling better, you know. So it's interesting. It is interesting, and I mean, it depends on the person, of course. I mean, you know, nobody likes going to these things, of course, and it's still a terribly upsetting and emotional thing, but it was just really struck me yesterday while I was sitting there, you know, how therapeutic it was, how beneficial it was, you know. Because the last time I made a video about this, it was about another family member, I think, triggered the last video about this, and I was explaining the logistics of those things, you know. Whereas this time it was more about the emotion of these things. So So yeah, that's it. So it's sort of a one part of it is supposed to be sort of a heads up thing. So if people find themselves in Japan, you sort of know what to expect. If you haven't watched the other video, watch that too. It'll be on the How to Do Stuff playlist probably. So if you haven't seen that yet, you might want to check that out, because it's just the logistics. You know, we have to do things like we have to take cash in a little special envelope. They have special envelopes for this, and there's some cultural things involved with that, how you do that, and there's a few logistical things, what you can wear, what you can't wear. Juzu is the Buddhist beads that you should have, and there's just a few logistical things like that that are in the other video that I haven't talked about in this one. So that one was more about the actual physical logistics involved. This one was more about the emotions involved, if you're close to the person, you know. And it depends on the situation too. I mean, I went to a funeral for one of our martial arts masters once, and I think he was 97 when he went, and he'd had a great life, and he was amazing at 97 years old. And it's sad because you lose them, but it's a totally different feeling when it's a 97-year-old who's had a full life and faded away quietly at the end. It was a totally different feeling from, you know, a healthy dude, a healthy dude. I mean, you know, 60 years old, but you know, that was a waste. It was a waste. It was much more emotional, as you can imagine, and it was just interesting with that their system helped, you know, the way they do it. Quite often you find that with Japanese stuff. Some Japanese stuff that at first look is like, oh geez, I don't like that real much, and then when you actually experience it, you actually find out, oh no, that actually works quite well. It's actually quite good. So it was one of those examples, you know. So anyway, that's more than enough of that. Hopefully that will help someone, because, you know, usually these things are much easier to deal with if you've heard about them before you experience them. You know, when you have to experience them yourself for the first time and you weren't aware of them, it can be quite difficult. But if you've at least heard about it first, and then when you're experiencing it, you go, oh, I've heard about this, okay, you know what to expect a little bit, and it'll be a bit easier. When you walk in and see your first open coffin, yeah, if you haven't seen one of those before, and your friend's lying in there looking up at you, that can be difficult at first if you're not used to it, you know. But if you know it's coming, it's not so bad. And the people will talk to the person too. The people will talk to the person, and they'll say to kids. That's the other one that blew me away the first time I saw kids at one of these things. And they'll say to the kids, "Go say goodbye to Uncle Yoshi," you know. And the kids will go up and look into the coffin and say, "Bye, Uncle Yoshi." Actually, just before I go, the sweetest one I saw was for the grandmother, and just before the cremation thing, they have the coffin laid out, you know, and in her case you could see all of her in a dress, you know, and they had this mountain of flowers, and everybody that came put a flower in the coffin, and what happened was the coffin got absolutely full, to the point where all that was left was just her face surrounded by flowers, and her whole body was surrounded by flowers. So all you could see of her was her face, and it was sweet. It was really, really sweet. Everybody came and put a flower in the coffin, you know, including the kids, and they all said, "Bye, Bar-chan," and put a flower in. It's really sweet. So feels quite confronting at first, but when you experience it a bit, you realize that no, there's some therapeutic value to this for everybody, you know. So anyway, that's enough of that. No more of that. More videos coming soon.